Good morning, YouTube. How's everybody doing out there? I'm Greg from GregsTutoringNYC at gmail.com. So I did a part one of this series I'm doing at the moment about the New York City High School Guide and the SHSAT Handbook for 2021 admissions. So this is part two of that. The first part I showed you how to download it, gave kind of an overview of what the two documents are about. Today we're going to talk more about their contents itself. Before I start, I want to make it clear that as you can see on the page right now, or you should be able to, let me move it up slightly. Registration for normal high schools, non-specialized high schools, is October 21st. Sorry, registration for the specialized high schools is October 21st, and registration for all the other high schools is December 4th. Also, the SHSAT itself will be taking place around the weeks after November 7th, and auditions for LaGuardia High School are going to be starting at the end of October through November and December. This all assumes that the impact of coronavirus is going to remain the same. It also assumes that schools are going to be opening back up. We don't know. That's a wild card in all this. So the dates, the current dates they're saying for these deadlines, they may change as well. Please make note that normally you would mostly register through myschools.nyc. There's other ways to register, or like go to your guidance council or go into a welcome center, but it's also upside down at the moment because of coronavirus as well. And normally registration doesn't open till after school starts. So we're talking at least mid-September until the two dates you're seeing on your screen right now. So make that clear that, so at the moment you're getting the guide. There's no paper copies. If you don't have it, there are a few paper copies were distributed, but that's the limit. They're doing it at the moment until school opens back up. So at the moment you have to get the guides digitally. Okay, so that's that. And the previous video, I'll put a link to it, will show you how to get access to that document. So what we're going to talk about today is the actual content, and I've kind of split it up into a few categories. I'm mainly going to focus on the specialized high school handbook and not the high school guide. What I want you to do is if you go to page 45 of the high school guide, which is the document I'm showing right now, it talks about how to register and the dates and stuff like that. So that's your snapshot of that, including what specialized high school information as well. All right. So we're going to talk about a bunch of things because they impact how the SHSAT's going to happen and so on. And I'm going to range it from stuff like straight out errata, because there might be an error in a question or an answer, to just general sloppiness of the handbook. This has traditionally been a problem with the SHSAT handbook, is they can be very sloppy, and especially their explanations of answers. And this year, there's a couple of things relating to formatting and fonts. So why don't we jump right into this? The first issue with the high school guide is that screen schools often have a few criteria, such in particular attendance, the New York State tests, and your report card grades. Well, the New York State has currently canceled the New York State test, so there's no New York State test score to go with. Attendance is up in the wind because school stopped halfway through the year, so you were not going to have a full attendance grade. Teachers are still taking attendance, but it's under a different criteria. And the third thing, which is report card grades, but middle school students are basically just going to get a pass-fail. They've removed the option where a middle school child can get an actual score. There is still some parents interested in the Department of Education changing that. So if you would like to do that, contact HS enrollment at schools.nyc.com. Let me type it into the path here, and hopefully I'm typing it right. Enrollment at schools.nyc.gov. I said .com. I make that mistake on a lot of these live streams. I believe that's the path. And you want to make it to the attention of Josh Wallach. Actually, it doesn't need to be his attention, but he's the deputy chancellor in charge of enrollment. So, and if there's any issues that you need to further know about, My email is flying across the bottom of the screen, GregsTutoringNYC@gmail.com. Don't hesitate to email. In fact, don't hesitate to contact me about any of this. The high school enrollment process is complicated. Even if you're not going for a specialized school, there's so many complexities in registering and things like that it's worth doing it. Anyway, so getting back, so the way screen schools are going to work is currently up in the air, and the high school guide does not say that. Okay, so what happened is they probably wrote the narrative for the guide in the SHSAT Handbook and sent it to the printer, and then coronavirus happened in the middle of it, and instead of changing that, or in the New York City website, where the previous video I show you how to get to the link, it should have said there that be aware that there's going to be changes to the high school guide, or even to the SHSAT Handbook, or any dates we're giving you there might be changes. It's all subject to that. You might say it's obvious, there's a pandemic, everybody knows that we may not know what's going on or whatever, but the truth of the matter is it should still say that, because it may not be clear to a parent, especially a non-English speaking family, that, oh, screens might change here. It's not obvious. That's more of a leap than, oh, there's a pandemic. Okay? So that's a main serious problem with the high school guide, where it talks about screen schools as if the three problems I mentioned, the attendance, the state test, and the report card grades, didn't happen. And there's various solutions being thrown about, like why don't they use last year's scores, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to get into that conversation here. Those are topics for something else. And yes, that's a valid way to do it. There's some alternatives saying let's get rid of screens altogether. I don't know how that solves any problems that we have in New York City. So if we get into the SHSAT Handbook itself, which is, again, so this is a one giant PDF, and there's actually two different documents within it. Again, if you watched the previous video, it'll talk about that. So let me flip now into the SHSAT Handbook. Okay, and I have written down a whole bunch of different stuff. Again, I have it in different categories. So I'm not sure which one to really do first here. But why don't I just take them in the order that I wrote them down here? And at some point, I'm going to create a PDF out of some of the notes I took and put it up somewhere, probably on my website. I have a website now, and I'm going to have to make use of it. I've actually had it for a while, but there's not any real content on it yet. And at that point, I'll put a link in the comment below, or actually make a comment. By the way, as I go through this list, if other people find other ones, please post them down below, and we can have, that way we can create one giant document with all the concerns about the SHSAT Handbook. So let's talk about sloppy things that's in the handbook. So if we go to page 107, give me 1 second to get there. And some of this is tedious, and some of this will have an impact. In fact, why don't I talk about the stuff that's going to have an impact first? Because this year there's a few notation differences that they're using. Part of the notation differences tie into the use of fonts, but some of them are actually differences in the way that they set up the handbook. Let me get to the right page. Okay, so one difference in notation is that this year they're actually using these charts. They haven't done that in the recent past. And I really honestly can't remember them ever doing it, although my memory could be short on that. So, so on page 55 here, there's a chart, which means there's going to be a question about this. So normally the SHSAT has avoided this DBQ, document-based question kind of a thing. So they have that in here on page 55. There's also another one on page 79. So this is a different approach. It means the reading comprehension section has different expectations than it's had in the past. So there's actually a visual here that the child has to interpret. And then there's another one, which is a histogram, which the child has to interpret. And again, this looks like a math problem. It's not. The question doesn't really involve math, but it still involves the comprehension and relating what this means into some sort of cognitive reading comprehension issue. Okay, let me just make sure we're still live. Yep, we seem to be live. So there's formatting issues like that. Okay. Let me bring the document back up here. Okay, there's also some other issues now if we talk about the math, which is formatting as well. If you notice on this line where it says simplify, they're using two different styles of minus signs. The minus 3.8, if you look at that harder, it's actually more elevated than the minus sign after the 2.3. Okay? The normal minus sign is the one after the 2.3, which is this one here. That's half height. The other ones, if you notice, are slightly elevated. So the one I have highlighted means subtraction. The other one means it's a negative number. So the minus sign before the 3.8 means that's the negative number. A lot of kids have never seen this before, believe it or not. It means what it always means if you see a negative sign, and even the implication of saying it's a negative sign or a minus sign, that's what we call it, a negative sign or a minus sign. But they actually have different meanings. One means subtraction and one means it's a negative number. Okay, but if you know how to do the order of operations, you'll be cool on this. There's an example later on where this becomes more significant, and there's a couple of cases where their use of fonts in this way, it actually gets to be misleading. So this is something people are going to have to look out for if they actually do this on the real SHSAT. This is a practice test. We don't know if they're going to use the same kind of fonts here. And this is the problem with changing fonts, that sometimes it could have this kind of a problem in it. So also on page 81, they've used a notation that everybody should know how to be familiar with. This box notation here, this box in here. Some of you have seen this since kindergarten maybe, but they normally don't do that. So the SHSAT has tended to avoid this kind of a thing before, and it just means solve for x. If you put x, the notion of solve x. This example happens to use x's. They're not really talking about that. But the question is solve for z in this case. Let's say the box was z. Just solve for that unknown. It's an empty box notation. So it just means solve for that. Another notation is this not equal sign right here. Believe it or not, some kids have never seen this before. So it turns out we need to get into mathematical notation and mathematical terminology and stuff like that too. These can be important. So, there's a lot of kids who have seen all the things I'm talking about right now at this point. There's some other things later that's not going to be the case. But a lot of kids get confused by this. Whereas in the past, they may have actually said that not equal sign with words. So kids need to know the terminology. This is not an easy test. Page 81. Page 82, there's another problem. Okay, so this example in 67, they've never given an example like this before that I can imagine. Other tests have, but the SHSAT is normally, I don't know if it's because previous they used it because of the font they were using, that it wouldn't let them present a mathematical problem in this kind of thing where the numerator and denominator are going horizontal and vertical in these different ways. But this is at least new in modern history that they're doing this. So watch out for examples like this, where you may not be familiar. You might be solving them with the divide sign with the two dots, where they wrote it out longhand that way. So now some of the examples are moving more into being horizontal as well as vertical. So again, this is a formatting issue that ties into fonts, but there's also there's no reason a child shouldn't know how to do this or know what this means. It's just that some kids are going to be unfamiliar with it because your teacher or your class may have used a certain style, or your school may have bought a certain brand of textbook that never used this kind of a style. So this is something you need to get used to and know how to understand and use. So that was 79. Go to page 81. No, we did that already. 82. Page 84. Okay, this problem 76 here with this list here, this can be confusing with some children. I work with kids on other tests where when they see that, they don't know what to do. They think a paragraph is missing before those list of numbers. And even when they read this, because it says the score is shown from the judges above, they're still like, wait, what's going on here? So they want some narrative before the numbers, because you come to this question and there's just a bunch of numbers and they're like, what do I do? What you need to do is you need to read the paragraph and find out why those numbers are just thrown there. And some other questions, they set it out as a set. So they say, assume set S for skaters or something like that. Or here's set S for scores. And they may use the curly bracket and so on. They don't need to do that. And this is, again, a formatting issue that kids need to understand. So they don't do this too often. So I'll just kind of point this out in that kind of a way. So a lot of these are just kind of take note of these. That's 84. Okay, 86 is another one where if you look at the -4 here and the -3, I gave the example before where the minus sign was halfway up and the other ones were slightly higher. These ones are really higher. Okay, and I've worked with kids on other tests where this kind of font and formatting throws a kid off. There's enough kids who are not even going to notice that the minus sign is there. They're going to associate it with the line, the actual drawing of the line somehow. And they're just going to see 4, 3, 2, 1. And it almost creates a visual optical illusion to them that minus sign doesn't even really exist. It's almost like it's a dashed line above the numbers. So again, be careful. And this is another example where they're using different fonts to do this. This is not the same way they did the elevated minus sign in the previous example. So this is something you need to watch out for, that they're going to keep doing stuff like this. And you need to analyze and look at every problem and every part of every question. Okay, so that was 87, problem 86. Okay, so that deals with issues involving formatting and fonts and so on. And also of notation. So there's a couple of sloppy issues in the handbook you might see. For instance, if you go to page 60 and 68, if you notice here, this is the bottom of the page, but there's another thing here. You see that line? There's 2 footers at the bottom of the page. And they've done this more than once. It's also on page 60, and it's also at the bottom of another page that has its own problem. So we'll talk about that in a second. So problems 60 and 68, page 60 and 68 have this problem as well. Okay? Getting back to some other examples like we did before. Now some of these are nitpicks because this kind of a problem, it doesn't matter. So if we get into font problems, so if you go to page 127, you might say that issue before with the elevated minus sign was a font problem as well. So on some of these, it may not really matter, and it ties into just being sloppy. But some kids, I've worked with enough kids where that kind of issue is going to throw them off. So I'm just trying to make notice of them. And again, I will post a PDF with a description of everything I'm talking about, kind of in a list form. So if we get to page 127, and again, this is all the SHSAT Handbook. This line here the line with the blue on it, that can appear to be a plus sign. That's actually a divide sign. You know, the minus with the two dots above and below it? On some devices, some kids are going to be doing this on a phone or a tablet. And even some screens, if you're doing this late at night, you're tired, and you have this on a split screen, you may have the questions next and on one side and the answers on the other side. That could look like a plus sign. So what they need to do is change the font. In particular, the bottom dot seems to be further away enough of the line, but the top dot is too close to the line. And they should have made a font where the two dots were not next to each other like that. Okay? So that's a divide sign. You might say, oh man, I'm really nitpicking this. Again, I've seen kids get these answers wrong because a kid might not even be able to see properly. They need glasses or something, or whatever. And there's no reason that divide sign could have been clearer. Okay. So if we go to page 136, there's a similar issue. And these are not the only examples of these. I'm only giving what I felt were the worst examples of this kind of thing. If you notice, the equal sign here on that first blue line is not the same equal sign that's being used here. This equal sign is not the same as this equal sign. And here's a good example where this equal sign looks normal, and these ones are so close together that some kids might think that's a minus sign. And the reason this becomes significant is because you're told at the beginning of the section to simplify all your answers. And it turns out that H, the answer for 90 is H. And that is not 110 over 12. So this is an example of an errata item, an exact errata item, where the should have said equal to 55 over 6. So because the actual answer is in here, if a kid knows how to solve the problem, they left out that extra step, and I can see the equal sign. But if a kid can't make that leap from that, oh, this isn't simplified, and H is not actually they're showing the answer to be 110 over 12, and there's no answer H or any answer that's 110 over 12. So a kid can get confused, especially if that's so tied together and they're looking at this on a phone, they might see this as a minus sign. So I don't know why they're using two different fonts here. I also don't know why they didn't give the actual simplification of the answer. These are supposed to be explanations of the answers, which, by the way, gets into some of the issues of the sloppiness of some of these things. So because if we go to, for instance, there's a whole bunch of examples. For instance, if we go to page 138, it turns out the way to solve question 95 and question 97, it's the same mechanism, it's the same technique. But if you look at the descriptions, they look like it's being solved completely different. 97 is presented as with a mathematical formula, and it just gets solved. 95 is done with words. But if you actually look at the resolution mechanism, it's the same one. Okay? And so that's one of the issues when you look at how the answers are solved, especially in the math section. There's alternative forms that can be used to solve problems. So don't get so strong that, oh, their explanation says, like 97 says, to do it this way. So that's the only way to answer it. It's not the only way to answer it. The only way to answer it is to get the answer. A lot of questions have 2, 3, 4, even 5 ways to solve them. So always use that. In fact, here's your tip, which is that if you solve it one way and you know a second way to solve it, do you double check the other way? Because if you make an error in solving something and you do it the same way again, you might do it the same way again twice. Wrong. So if you do an alternate way, you have a way to double check it with a different technique. Okay? So anyway, there's stuff like that. Also, if you go to, for instance, page 107, getting back into the ELA part, The SHSAT Handbook uses this more often, where when they gave explanations for the ELA, they would kind of say like, this answer is correct because it is. And I think that's the problem here with this explanation here. First of all, I'm all for being clear and concise. In fact, if you look at question 23, if it's the one I think it is, question 23 was pretty succinct. It was pretty. Some questions are really elaborate and really wordy. 23 was really to the point. So being clear and concise has its benefit. But something like this is too much of an issue. It's really pushing it too strongly. And if a kid doesn't know why, an explanation like this doesn't really help them. Now the SHSAT handbook has gotten better with that over the years, but there's still remnants of this hanging there. And there's a few instances of this in the math section as well. For instance, if we go to page 141, in fact, a lot of the math is kind of not really mathematically astute in their explanations. But let me show you a couple examples where there's even no explanations. So if we go to, for instance, 108, that's it. That's all it gives you guys. It's just there like that. Same for 110. Pretty terse. Now you might say, well, if you know how to do percents, that's all they need to say. That might be true, but imagine if your teachers just spent all day saying, here's the question, and here's the answer. Here's the question, and here's the answer. That's kind of too pushing it. Again, if you know how to solve the problem, this is sufficient. If you don't know how to solve the problem, you need an explanation. You need something to tell you what's going on. Also, if we go to page 128, is that the page I was just at? The explanation here, again, is clear and concise. If you made a silly error in answering this answer, and you're really astute, this answer is sufficient to get you to the next question. But if you made a major error or didn't really understand the question at all, the answer to this 69, it's not going to help you at all. So sometimes these are tutors for their own good. On the flip side, some of the answers are really wordy, and they're not helpful either. All right, so we covered a lot of categories of stuff here. Let me see. There's a couple of categories, one or two missing. So, by the way, the structure. So as I'm talking about differences like formatting, where they added the DPQ, and they used the box notation, and they used examples like 67 that's on the screen right here. A lot of things stayed the same. So there's still the ELA section, there's still a math section. Within the math, there's still 5 gradings and 52 multiple choice. Within the ELA, there's still 57 questions, and it's still broken down by the revision editing A, revision editing B, and the reading comprehension. There's still 10 field questions per section. The scoring is still going to be happening the same way. And there's still wildcard stuff like the number of questions in the revising and editing is indeterminate. They just say there's up to 19. The savings, the reading comprehension questions. There's also wildcards that happen, and this is a truism that happened last year, actually on the test day, which is that it's the first time they actually added more than one poem in their reading comprehension. In fact, some kids got 3, and some kids even got 4 poems to interpret in the reading comprehension section, which is a total wildcard whammy thrown on everybody. Okay, anyway, so what are the other categories we have here? We have the sloppiness. There is the font problems. There is notation problems. Okay, so let's get down to issues that are more errata themselves. So if we go to page 92, and this is probably the ones that matter the most because these are outright errors in some stuff. the right page. Page 92. Problem 110. Yeah, this has an issue where it just implies nothing else is happening with the account, where it just says there's no more money withdrawn. And on a lot of these problems, you have to make mathematical determinations. Like if it says this consecutive numbers, yada yada, you need to sometime infer that, oh, they're talking about integers because there's no other way this problem can work. If they say like it's the day of the week, the day of the month, the max number, the number can never be 50, right? So there's enough examples where you have to make that inference mathematically, including your knowledge of the world mathematically. But this was one case where it just said this interest happening, and no other money is withdrawn. But it doesn't tell anything about like if a deposit was made. So that's more of a leap that has to be made with this problem. And they could have worded it to make that clearer. The answer here, I believe, was G, but some kids might make it H for that reason, saying, well, it's at least 367.5 and above. It says how much money we'll have in this account every year. So some kids are going to get confused between G and H based on that. You might say, well, they're not mathematically proficient enough. If the answer was G, they should have known that. And it doesn't matter that you're saying some more money could be deposited. Because if you're going to say that, really, since the wording mentions nothing about other deposits, then why are you assuming there could have been deposits? So those are all valid things. So, but there's going to be some kids who might balk at a problem like this. And it gets back to being, you have to work on your word problems and being astute on things like this, okay? So anyway, you could argue this problem may have some issues with it. And now if we go to problem number 120, page 125. So if you notice here, it talks about the minus 1.1, but over here, it does minus 1. So the solution mechanism for solving this problem is to take the minus 1.1 and make it 1.1. So that when it's used down here, that the minus cancels themselves out. But this just uses minus 1. So I don't know if they meant that as a representational example, that minus x is the same as x or not. But that should have said 1.1. So that's a typo issue right there. Okay, the next problem, page 59, it falls off the page. In fact, if you look at it, that thing right there is the answer. So I showed you before where things fell off the page and it was like a double footer. This is the same problem. So they have some formatting problems in there. And that, I believe, says 150 with the degree sign. So most kids would be able to read this and say, oh, that's 150 and that's the answer. They can make that deduction. This is talking about little r, though. And if you put 2 and 2 together, the angle r is little r here. And you'll be able to make the notation that's actually 150 in there. But so there's a screw up there as well then, all right? So that's 125. It's 59. Okay, if you go to page 126, problem 62. Okay, this explanation for 62 is actually valid, but about this point, it gets shaky. From this point down, it gets shaky. So again, if a kid knows how to get the right answer, or they made a minor error or a silly error in the computation, then this answer is sufficient. But again, if a kid doesn't know how to do this, this explanation is actually confusing for a child. So there's that. So this gets back into being sloppy and all this other stuff too. But so I would rule this into an errata issue, 126.62. And the last one I have is 136. . Okay, we talked about this one already, where this should actually say equals 55/6. Okay, so there you guys have it. This is a discussion of some of the issues that were involved in production of this manual. Some of them are formatting, some are bad explanations, some are just sloppiness. There's various issues tied into that. All right. Again, I encourage you guys to follow me. I'm going to do a part 3 and maybe even a part 4 of this, because this is only talking about Form A. I'm also going to analyze Form B and also the grade 9 math questions that are also in the back of the book, and get into that. Again, I'm Greg from GregsTutoringNYC at gmail.com. Please like the video. Please subscribe to my channel. Don't hesitate at all to email me and ask for any other advice or whatever. It's what I'm here for. I like helping people. And again, I'm going to post this somewhere. I will put it down below, either as the first comment or something, and put a link to it somewhere. All right, everybody. Hopefully, that's a good day, and peace out, people.